Did you know that one mistake could cost millions of lives? In this story, the USA decided the fate of the war in just a few days. If you're interested in the truth about World War II, subscribe and hit the like button. There are many shocking facts ahead. October 5, 1944, over Asselt, Netherlands. The sky above the Dutch countryside shimmered with sunlight, but something far more extraordinary was about to pierce that tranquil afternoon. Imagine yourself high above the patchwork fields, strapped into the tight cockpit of a Mark 9 Spitfire. The engines hum, a familiar companion. You're flying with number 401 Squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force, 5 aircraft strong, patrolling the skies, when suddenly a glint of silver streaks across your vision like lightning. Squadron Leader Smith is the first to spot it. What is that? No spinning propeller, no recognizable silhouette, just a silver dart slicing through the atmosphere at a speed that seems impossible. It's diving hard toward Nijmegen, the air behind it shimmering from twin exhaust trails. That is no ordinary aircraft. It's the fabled Me-262 jet fighter. And it's real. For years, whispers had rippled through Allied intelligence about Germany's secret jet program. But now, at over 500 miles per hour, rumor gave way to reality. The future of air warfare was no longer hypothetical. It was right there, roaring past in a blur of metal and fire. Without hesitation, Smith radioed his wingmen, Flight Lieutenants Davenport and Everard, Flying Officers Mackay and Sinclair, ordering them into attack formation. What followed would go down in history. The first time a jet fighter was brought down in aerial combat by gunfire. A moment that shattered the illusion of German invincibility. This Me-262, the pride of the Luftwaffe's secret arsenal, had just shown its Achilles heel. It wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a turning point in psychological warfare. German propaganda had hailed the Me-262 Schwalbe as a wonder weapon, a game-changer that would sweep Allied bombers from the sky. But cracks were already forming. In the months that followed, American P-51 Mustang pilots would exploit those cracks ruthlessly, transforming what had once seemed an unstoppable machine into a hunted relic of desperation. Across Europe, Allied fighter squadrons buzzed with the shock and awe of this new encounter. The implications were immediate and sobering. Captain Chuck Yeager, stationed with the 357th Fighter Group at RAF Leicester, listened closely as intelligence officers described the Me-262's capabilities. The numbers were chilling, a jet that could hit 540 miles per hour in level flight. The Mustang? Only 437. The conclusion was inescapable. In a straight pursuit, the Me-262 could not be caught. The math was merciless. If Germany managed to deploy these jets in serious numbers, with enough fuel, enough trained pilots, the entire Allied bombing campaign could crumble. Imagine B-17, flying fortresses crawling through flak-ridden skies at 180 miles per hour, utterly defenseless against predators that could strike from above, below, behind, and vanish before anyone could respond. For the first time since the Allies had seized control of Europe's skies, the balance of power teetered dangerously. But speed, as it turned out, was not everything. The Me-262 was a marvel of design, but like all revolutionary technology, it carried within it the seeds of its own downfall. Its engines, Junkers Jumo Uriel-4 axial flow turbojets, were a monumental leap forward, yet they were also fragile, immature, and full of quirks. Each engine could generate about 180 pounds of thrust at 700 RPM, guzzling J2 synthetic fuel, a volatile concoction made from brown coal, at twice the rate of a piston engine. That alone strained Germany's already beleaguered fuel logistics. And the turbine blades? Crafted from chromadur alloy, a compromise forced by a shortage of high-quality heat-resistant metals like nickel and chromium. The result? Blades that suffered rapid thermal fatigue. Under the stress of combat, these engines required complete overhauls after just 10 hours of flight. Often, full engine replacements were necessary after only 25 hours in the air. In practical terms, a Me-262 might need new engines after 3 or 4 missions. It was a logistical nightmare that German ground crews were never equipped to handle at scale. And then came the most damning flaw of all, the throttle. Unlike the intuitive responsiveness of piston engines, the Jumo 004 demanded patience. A pilot couldn't just slam the throttle forward. Doing so risked a fuel surge that could cause catastrophic overheating. Instead, they had to coax the engine gently, wait for it to respond. A second too fast, and the jet could flame out, or worse. In a dogfight, where life or death hangs on the smallest reflex, this delay was fatal. The world's fastest fighter could, in those critical seconds, become an easy mark. So, what would you do if you were up there, a split second to react, an enemy that disappears like smoke, and a machine beneath you that's faster than thought, yet vulnerable in its very core? That's the paradox of the Me-262, a glimpse into the future, sabotaged by the limits of the present. Now, picture this. A cutting-edge jet fighter, a marvel of speed and engineering, yet fatally exposed at its most vulnerable moments. Takeoff and landing. That was the paradox of the Me-262. Yes, it could outpace anything in the sky at altitude. But getting there? That was another matter entirely. The Me-262 carried an immense burden, literally. With a wing loading of 294 kilograms per square meter, it was significantly heavier on the wing than any of its contemporaries. This demanded takeoff and landing speeds in excess of 110 miles per hour, far above what most fighter pilots were used to. And during that crucial, agonizing half-minute after brake release, the jet was a sitting duck, crawling down the runway, engines wheezing at low thrust, unable to maneuver or defend itself. Can you imagine it? A machine of the future, rolling helplessly across the tarmac like a deer caught in the hunter's scope. And the danger didn't end once the mission was complete. Me-262 pilots returning from high-speed intercept sorties, their fuel tanks nearly dry after 60 to 90 minutes of flight, were forced into the same death trap. As they descended toward base, slowing to configure flaps and landing gear, they became glaring targets, slow, predictable, and defenseless. The very engines that gave the Me-262 supremacy at 25,000 feet became chains pulling it toward vulnerability as it approached the Earth. Allied intelligence, ever watchful, noticed the pattern. By late summer and into the fall of 1944, analysts at the 8th Air Force headquarters in England began piecing together a strategy. Reconnaissance photos revealed the key airfields where the Me-262 was stationed: Akmar, Hessepe, Rhein, Lechfeld, Munich, Riem. Gun camera footage from sporadic jet encounters was studied frame by frame. The reports were clear. Me-262s were formidable in the sky, but terrifyingly fragile at low speeds. And then came the masterstroke. The Me-262's engines burned a special synthetic fuel, J-2, refined from brown coal, available only at select bases. These jets couldn't simply divert to any nearby airstrip. They had to return to specific, fuel-supplied locations. That constraint turned into an opportunity. If Allied Mustangs could wait high above, just outside visual range, they could pounce when the jets were at their weakest. It was a hunter's tactic. Patience, precision, and bravery. The skies around these known bases were thick with flak, with German anti-aircraft gunners ready to paint the heavens in fire. But this was the only real shot prop-driven fighters had at leveling the playing field. The Luftwaffe understood this danger too well. In response, they threw everything into the defense of Me-262 bases. Defensive corridors, flak alleys, bristled with 8 Leutnant guns, 37 cannons, and the deadly quad-barreled 20mm systems. Elite piston engine fighters like the Focke-Wulf FW-190D and the rare Tay Wurmfeusarh patrolled the skies, shielding jets during their vulnerable climb and descent. They randomized flight schedules, used dummy aircraft to lure attackers into traps, and even turned sections of the Autobahn into emergency runways with camouflaged hideouts in the trees nearby. But none of it solved the core problem. The Me-262 had to land. The Me-262 had to take off. And no amount of firepower could change that. One young pilot, Lieutenant Urban Ben Drew of the 361st Fighter Group, knew this better than most. At just 21, the Detroit native had already seen a jet up close and lived to report every detail. His earlier encounter earned him the attention of Allied intelligence, and on October 7, 1944, despite being grounded for an unauthorized victory roll, he was called upon for a mission that would test both nerve and skill. Why him? Because reconnaissance showed a cluster of Me-262s at Akmer Aerodrome, and Drew had faced one before. He gathered his flight, outlining a plan that would require nerves of steel, dive straight into the lion's den, straight through German flak, and strike fast without hesitation. His wingman, Second Lieutenant Robert McCandless, swore to stay on his wing no matter what. Drew's P-51 Mustang, tail code E2D and proudly christened Detroit Miss, lifted off from RAF Little Walden, fully fueled, tanks brimming, wings loaded for war. The skies over Germany that day offered just enough cloud cover to mask a surprise, but with enough breaks for eyes to scan the fields below. At 15,000 feet, they closed on Akmer, and there they were, two silver darts at the runway's edge, engines running, ready to leap into the sky. Drew didn't wait. He shoved the throttle forward, dove hard, his airspeed climbing past 400 miles per hour. The Me-262s had only just started their takeoff roll. One of them, piloted by Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, a seasoned ace, was no more than halfway down the runway. Drew lined up, 800 yards out, 6 to 50 caliber guns blazing. Tracers stitched the air, walking their way toward the jet's right engine nacelle. Impact. The explosion rocked Arnold's Me-262, but he was already too fast to abort. On one engine, the jet clawed into the air, wounded, staggering, but airborne. Drew pressed in. At just 400 yards, he fired again. This time, rounds smashed into the cockpit. The Schwalbe rolled inverted, lost control, and plunged into the trees at the runway's edge. Flames erupted skyward as the wreckage vanished into the forest. One less jet to threaten the skies. One more nail in the coffin of the Nazis' airborne dream. Now picture the scene again. Just moments after the first jet has been torn apart, mid-roll. Smoke and fire rise from the shattered remains of Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold's Me-262. And yet, there on the runway, a second jet still barrels forward. Lieutenant Gerhard Kobert is at the controls, and he's seen what just happened to his comrade. He tries to abort, But this is no ordinary fighter. This is the Me-262. And nothing happens quickly. The sluggish throttle response, the very flaw that makes the jet lethal in the air but helpless on the ground, traps Cobert in a lethal dilemma. He's moving too fast to stop, too slow to fly. He's caught in the middle, in a metal coffin with wings. Lieutenant Urban Drew wastes no time. Climbing out of his first attack run, he banks hard, ignoring the shrieking warnings from McCandless, whose voice crackles over the radio. "Flak! Flak's found us!" 88mm shells burst like black flowers around their Mustangs, the sky suddenly a death trap. But Drew's focus is ice cold. He pushes the nose down again, straight into the maelstrom, zeroing in on Cobert's vulnerable Me-262 as it tries to veer off the runway. He opens fire long, steady, brutal. Tracer rounds dance across the fuselage, riddle the engines, and find the fuel tanks. A heartbeat later, the jet ignites. Flames engulf the aircraft. Somehow Cobert survives, leaping from the inferno. But the aircraft? Gone. Destroyed. In less than 120 seconds, Drew has accomplished what many thought impossible, obliterating two of Nazi Germany's most advanced jet fighters with a propeller-driven aircraft under heavy flak, using boldness and perfect timing. But war has little time for celebration. Drew's gun camera jammed during the mission, capturing none of the action. His only eyewitness, McCandless, was shot down by flak during the escape and taken a prisoner before he could confirm the kills. Without film or testimony, 8th Air Force Headquarters refused to credit Drew for the victories. Imagine that after pulling off one of the most extraordinary feats in aerial combat, the young pilot received nothing but silence. The moment passed into memory, unrecognized, until nearly 4 decades later, in 1983, the puzzle pieces finally aligned. German Luftwaffe records were matched with American reports. One name surfaced, Georg Peter Eder, a seasoned ace and squadron leader who was scheduled to lead the jet formation that day. His Me-262 had suffered mechanical failure, grounding him, but Eder had watched from the airfield as a yellow-nosed P-51 Mustang dove from the sky and destroyed both jets. He couldn't read the name Detroit Miss from the ground, but his sworn testimony was enough. On May 12, 1983, in a long-overdue ceremony, the United States Air Force presented Urban Drew with the Air Force Cross. He and his wife were flown in from Johannesburg aboard a C-141 Starlifter, greeted as heroes. To this day, Drew remains the only Allied pilot to down 2 jet fighters in a single mission while flying a propeller-driven aircraft. But the story of October 7, 1944, doesn't end there. That same day, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke I, of the 8th Air Force's most experienced fighter leaders, may have scored another jet kill. During a mission over Germany, he engaged what he believed was a Messerschmitt Bf 109. His gun camera footage was murky, indistinct. Was it a piston-engine fighter or a jet? Post-war analysis leans toward the latter. But like Drew's, the kill was never officially confirmed. And in the end, it wasn't about individual tallies. It was about pattern recognition. Pilots like Drew, Zemke, and others were proving a revolutionary truth. The MA-262, for all its speed and engineering brilliance, was not untouchable. It could be beaten, not by chasing it, but by outthinking it. 1 month later, another name entered the story. A name that would become legend. Chuck Yeager. On November 6, 1944, Yeager led a bomber escort mission near Acmer. Flying his P-51 Glamorous Glenn III, named after his wife Glennis, Yeager scanned the skies above a formation of lumbering B-17s. Suddenly, there they were, Me-262s. They cut through the formation like silver phantoms, firing quick bursts before zooming back upward into the clouds, relying on their superior speed to make clean escapes. Standard doctrine advised against pursuit. But Yeager wasn't one for doctrine. He made a gamble. Those jets couldn't stay up forever. Fuel was short. They had to land, and soon. Breaking from formation, Yeager descended through the clouds. Below him, the land unfolded, and there, like prey walking into a trap, was a lone Me-262, gear and flaps down, gliding gently onto final approach. Speed, 150 miles per hour, vulnerable, blind to the predator above. Yeager didn't hesitate. He dove hard, his P-51 slicing the air. Gravity lent him speed over 450 miles per hour. At 400 yards, he opened fire. Tracers lanced through the air, striking the jet's wing root, fuselage, and engine nacelles. The Me-262 never even twitched. Wounded or already dead, the pilot made no evasive move. Yeager closed to point-blank range, hammering rounds into the cockpit. The jet's left wing folded upward like a breaking bone. It rolled inverted and dropped into the forest below, vanishing in a ball of fire just short of the runway. And then, chaos. Akmar's defensive flak guns roared to life. 88s boomed, tracers slashed the sky, and Yeager's only hope was speed. He leveled off at treetop height, flew straight down the runway as shells crisscrossed overhead. In the frenzy, some flak gunners even hit their own batteries on the far side. Yeager rocketed away, pulled hard for cover, and vanished into a nearby valley. He had survived one of the most dangerous air combat scenarios imaginable and proven that the Me-262, under the right conditions, could be hunted. Later, Yeager would recount the moment with signature bluntness. First time I saw a jet, I shot it down. Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell? By late 1944 and into 1945, tactics evolved. Gun camera footage and combat debriefs fed new doctrines. The P-51 Mustang, with its unmatched range, became the perfect jet hunter. Outfitted with full internal fuel and twin drop tanks, it could stay airborne for 7 hours, long enough to loiter near jet bases and wait. The key was altitude. By maintaining height, Mustang pilots could trade it for speed in the dive, reaching over 500 miles per hour in rare cases. Not enough to chase a fleeing jet, but more than enough to intercept during takeoff or landing. Timing was everything. Catching a Me-262 during takeoff required seeing it early, then diving hard before it left the ground. Catching one on landing demanded patience, the kind of patience only a seasoned pilot possessed. Wait until the jet was committed to the final approach. Gear down, flaps extended, nose straight, and then strike. Through persistence and methodical observation, American pilots built an intimate understanding of Me-262 operations. They learned where the jets were based, how they flew, when they returned. Slowly but surely, they turned the tide. Speed, after all, meant little if your enemy knew when and where you'd have to slow down. Now imagine it, just seconds after one jet has been turned into a burning carcass of twisted alloy, its wreckage strewn across the runway. Black smoke coils skyward, and yet right there in the chaos, another Me-262 still rolls forward, trapped in momentum, unable to stop, unable to fly. At the controls is Lieutenant Gerhard Kobert. He's seen the fireball that consumed Heinz Arnold. He knows exactly what's coming. He tries to brake, to abort, to stop what feels inevitable. But the Me-262 offers no mercy in such moments. Its sluggish throttle response, the very feature that gave it power at altitude, now betrays him completely. Cobert is moving too quickly to halt, too slowly to escape. He is a man caught in the crosshairs of physics and fate, strapped into a machine that won't obey, and above, the predator circles. Lieutenant Urban Drew pulls out of his dive, levels briefly, then banks sharply for another run. His Mustang slices back toward the runway, heedless of McCandless's frantic calls over the radio. Flak's coming up heavy. All around them, 88mm shells detonate with terrifying proximity, ink-black bursts blooming against the sky. But Drew is locked in. No hesitation, no fear. He lines up the second jet. Cobert's Me-262, trying in vain to turn off the runway, becomes the focus of Drew's guns. He fires a relentless, punishing burst. Tracers rip down from above, dancing like lightning across the fuselage, chewing through both engines. Then ignition. The jet erupts into a violent bloom of fire and smoke. Cobert manages to throw himself clear, bruised but alive. The aircraft? Reduced to scorched metal and ash. 2 jet kills, 2 minutes, 1 Mustang. It was a moment few thought possible. The methodical destruction of the world's most advanced fighters, not by overwhelming force, but by a single pilot with perfect timing, steel nerves, and tactical genius. But war, cruel as ever, denied him the moment. Drew's gun camera had jammed no footage. McCandless, his only witness, was downed by flak during their withdrawal, captured before he could verify what he saw. No proof, no confirmation, no recognition. The 8th Air Force Headquarters refused to award Drew the victories. For decades, the most audacious jet kill in history vanished into obscurity, until history, at last, caught up. In 1983, through painstaking comparison of Luftwaffe logs and American after-action reports, the truth resurfaced. One name stood out: Georg Peter Eder. A German ace grounded that day by engine trouble. Eder had stood on the airfield and watched as a yellow-nosed Mustang Detroit misdived like a hawk onto its prey, obliterating both jets before roaring away. He hadn't seen the name painted on the Mustang's nose, but his testimony was all that was needed. On May 12, 1983, the United States Air Force finally set the record straight. Urban Ben Drew was awarded the Air Force Cross. He and his wife were flown from Johannesburg aboard a C-141 Starlifter, honored in a ceremony that echoed across 4 decades of silence. To this day, Drew holds a singular place in history, the only Allied pilot to shoot down 2 jet aircraft in a single mission while flying a piston-engine fighter. But the sky was not done that day. Elsewhere on October 7, 1944, another pilot may have added to the tally. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, one of the 8th Air Force's most seasoned and respected leaders, engaged an aircraft over Germany that he believed to be a Bf-109. His gun camera footage, however, left questions. The profile was indistinct, fleeting. Was it a 109 or a jet? Post-war analysis leaned toward the latter, but with no conclusive proof, the claim was never confirmed. Yet something more important was emerging. A pattern. Drew, Zemke, pilots across Europe were discovering the truth. The Me-262 could be outsmarted, not chased, not bested in the climb, but trapped when it was weakest, slowest, vulnerable. Then came November, and with it, a legend. Chuck Yeager, November 6, 1944. Yeager, flying his P-51 glamorous Glenn III, led a bomber escort near Acma. High above the lumbering B-17s, he scanned the skies, and then ghosts. Me-262s slashed through the bomber formation in a blur of motion, firing short, precise bursts before climbing away at impossible angles, gone before the Mustangs could blink. Standard orders were clear: don't chase the jets. But Yeager, ever the gambler, saw a different play. Jets didn't fly forever. They had to land, and soon. Fuel was always short. That was the flaw. He broke from formation, dove through the cloud cover, and searched. And there it was. A single Me-262, gear and flaps deployed, lining up for final approach at Acmer Airfield. The speed had dropped to just 150 miles per hour. The pilot, focused on the runway, never saw what was coming. Yeager dove. Gravity accelerated his Mustang past 405 miles. He closed to 400 yards, opened fire. Tracers laced the sky, carving into the jet's wing root and engine housing. There was no response, no evasive move. The German pilot, either hit or stunned, remained fixed on his descent. Yeager pressed in, point blank. The P-51's guns tore into the cockpit and fuselage. The Me-262's left wing folded, the jet rolled, and vanished into the forest below in a boiling fireball. And then the sky erupted. Flak batteries around Acmer exploded into action. 88s pounded the sky. Tracers stitched wild patterns across the air. In the chaos, gunners on one side hit their own on the opposite. Yeager, flying at treetop level, screamed down the runway at breakneck speed. No time to think, no room for error. He cleared the far end, pulled hard into a valley, and vanished. Later, with classic understatement, he described it simply. "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down. Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell?" By late 1944 and into the closing months of the war, Allied air tactics had evolved into something cold, calculated, and devastating. Gun camera footage, pilot debriefings, and mission data fed a growing body of tactical knowledge. The Me-262 was no longer a ghost, it was a machine, and machines could be understood. The P-51 Mustang became the perfect tool for the job. With long-range fuel tanks and endurance exceeding 7 hours, Mustangs could loiter near Me-262 bases, circling like sharks, waiting for the moment to strike. The key was altitude. By staying high, Mustang pilots could dive to attack, trading height for speed. In that descent, a P-51 could briefly match or even exceed 500 mph, just enough to intercept a jet before it reached safety. But it was all about timing. Attacking during takeoff required spotting the jet early and initiating the dive before it reached airborne speed. Attacking on landing demanded patience, waiting until the Me-262 had fully committed, gear down, flaps extended, speed reduced, and then strike. This new doctrine didn't emerge overnight. It came from observation, from countless missions, from lives risked and lessons learned the hard way. And in the end, speed meant little if your enemy knew exactly when and where you had to slow down. That's how the world's first jet fighter, brilliant, terrifying, revolutionary, was outwitted by those who refused to fight it on its terms. Imagine a battlefield where the skies are no longer dominated by roaring piston engines, but by sleek silver darts streaking faster than the eye can follow. The Me-262 promised to change the rules of air combat, but in the end, its legacy became something far more complex. By the final months of the war, it wasn't just American aces chasing Germany's revolutionary jet. British pilots joined the hunt as well. Flying Hawker Tempests and Spitfires, they claimed over a dozen additional Me-262 kills. The result? Attrition. Pure, grinding attrition. Despite Germany continuing to build the jets until the very end, losses in the field began to eclipse production. Me-262 squadrons were bleeding aircraft faster than they could be replaced. The cutting-edge fighter, hailed as a war winner, was slipping into obsolescence not because of its design, but because of the relentless Allied response. And what of the men who flew them? The Luftwaffe's elite, the jet pioneers, were divided in their post-war reflections. Georg Peter Eder, who downed 12 aircraft in the Me-2629, of them P-51s, acknowledged the jet's speed gave him a clear advantage in bomber interceptions. Yet even he admitted that the Allies had adapted. That speed advantage, once overwhelming, was being neutralized by evolving tactics. Walter Dahl, credited with 11 victories in the jet, including 6 Mustangs, spoke candidly about the jet's limitations. Fuel shortages, fragile engines, narrow margins. The Me-262's theoretical superiority, he said, rarely translated into battlefield dominance. Heinrich Baer, with 16 jet kills and a staggering 240 total victories, summed it up bluntly: the Me-262 came too late and in too small numbers to make a difference. Franz Schall, likely the top-scoring Me-262 pilot with 17 kills, including 6 four-engine bombers, never had the chance to reflect. He died in April 1945. But his earlier reports had already highlighted the jet's struggles: difficulty engaging agile fighters, excessive landing speeds, and a turning radius too wide for dogfights. Yet the jet's impact didn't die with its pilots. Allied engineers were quick to seize upon the Me-262's legacy. At captured airfields in Germany and testing centers in the UK and US, they dismantled and studied the jets meticulously. The verdict? The core design was brilliant, the execution flawed by the constraints of a collapsing Reich. From these post-mortems came a new generation of aircraft: America's Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star and Republic F-84, the Soviet MiG-15. These jets addressed the Me-262's key failings: longer engine life, smoother throttle response, stronger frames, better efficiency. Every bolt and turbine blade told a story, and engineers listened. But engineering was only half the legacy. The other was written in blood, risk, and memory. American pilots who succeeded against the Me-262, like Urban Drew and Chuck Yeager, became something more than aces. They became living textbooks. Their mission reports were dissected by intelligence analysts. Their tactics became curriculum. These pilots didn't just win dogfights, they taught generations how to defeat an enemy with superior speed. They shared traits: eagle-eyed vision, icy precision with their guns, an aggressive edge, and a willingness to fly into missions that others hesitated to accept. Attacking jet bases under a ceiling of flak was an act of borderline madness. But they did it, again and again, because they understood the stakes. And the cost? It was steep for both sides. American pilots who fell during attacks on jet bases often died alone, far from home, incinerated in crashes no one would ever witness. Some were never recovered. German Me-262 pilots were a vanishing breed. These weren't green recruits. They were the Luftwaffe's finest, and each loss carried a weight the Third Reich couldn't bear. Hundreds of hours of training, rare fuel, irreplaceable experience. Under this pressure, mistakes increased. Pilots died in takeoff accidents. Others made fatal miscalculations during landings or combat. Even the best began to falter. Meanwhile, the foundation beneath the Me-262 began to collapse. By early 1945, the infrastructure keeping the jet in the air was crumbling. Fuel supplies, already scarce, dried up as refineries were bombed or captured. Replacement engines became fantasies, as factories were destroyed. Spare parts vanished. Mechanics were killed or reassigned to frontline infantry as Germany's manpower reserves evaporated. Even the airfields themselves fell, overrun by advancing Allied armies. Desperate pilots launched from autobahns, hid jets in forest clearings, and worked under skies constantly patrolled by enemy aircraft. In the final days, April into May, 262 operations became fragmented, almost feral. Units no longer received orders. They flew when fuel was available. Some jets launched on suicide missions with no expectation of return. Others flew to Allied positions and surrendered. A handful, especially from Yeager 44, kept fighting until the bitter end, destroying bombers even as the Third Reich collapsed around them. When the dust settled, historians and aviation experts began the final reckoning. Yes, the Me-262 was revolutionary. Yes, it changed air combat forever. But it had arrived into a world it could no longer influence, even if production hadn't been delayed by Hitler's misguided bomber obsession. Even if the engines had been more reliable. Even if the jet had entered combat earlier in the war, it wouldn't have been enough. Germany lacked trained pilots. It lacked the fuel, the industrial capacity, the command structure, and most critically, it lacked time. And yet, the Me-262 left a legacy that echoed for decades. In military academies around the world, it became a case study in one fundamental truth. Technology does not guarantee victory. Even the most advanced weapon can be defeated if its weaknesses are understood and exploited. The lessons learned in those desperate air duels became part of the fighter pilot's DNA. Don't attack an enemy where he's strongest. Use your environment, altitude, speed, terrain as weapons. Wait for the vulnerable moment and strike with precision. Never underestimate the will and cunning of your opponent. And through it all, the voices of those who lived it remained. Chuck Yeager, in his memoirs and interviews, painted vivid portraits of the mental toll, the tension of waiting above flak-riddled airfields, the instant decisions made with nothing but instinct and experience, the exhale that only came after escape. Urban Drew, decades after his overdue recognition, spoke not with bitterness but with quiet pride. He lamented the years without acknowledgement, but emphasized something more important. The mission had mattered. Recognition was secondary. And in the end, the Me-262 gave the world more than speed. It gave lessons. Lessons in humility, in courage, in adaptation. It reminded us all that the future arrives imperfect, that innovation alone is never enough, and that victory, true victory, is earned not just with machines, but with minds, hearts, and unflinching will. It began with fire and thunder in the skies over Europe, but the Me-262 story didn't end in combat. It ended in design rooms, test facilities, and doctrine handbooks around the world. The Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star was America's direct response to everything the Me-262 had revealed, both its power and its limitations. Where the German jet was revolutionary yet flawed, the P-80 was refined from the lessons written in fire. Its engines were sturdier, lasting longer, and responding more smoothly to throttle changes, eliminating the dangerous lag that had plagued Me-262 pilots. Its improved fuel efficiency extended range well beyond the Me-262's 650-mile limit, while reinforced landing gear drastically reduced the accidents that had crippled German jet operations. Even the cockpit told a story of evolution, cleaner lines, better visibility, and heightened situational awareness during the most perilous moments, takeoff and landing. The Soviets watched all of this and learned as well. Captured Mi-62s, and their engines were shipped across borders, disassembled, tested, and studied in cold laboratories from Moscow to Novosibirsk. The lessons learned there would shape the MiG-15, the Yak-15, and the backbone of Soviet jet design. Not all the knowledge came from captured hardware. Some came through shadowy channels of espionage and backdoor technology transfers from Britain. The result? An explosion. A global jet age ignited by the shockwaves of German innovation. Within a single decade of the war's end, the world changed. The propeller fighter, once the king of air combat, was gone from the front lines. Relegated to training, to second-tier roles, to air shows and museums, every major air force now flew jets, their shapes and performance echoing design features first tested in Mi-262 prototypes. And yet, what did it all amount to in the war itself? Tactical success, strategic failure. Mi-262s did what they were designed to do when conditions allowed. Pilots racked up kills. Bombers were destroyed. Squadrons were bloodied. But it wasn't enough. The Allied bombing campaign thundered on. Fighter groups roamed the skies without pause. The Wehrmacht, despite pockets of resistance, was hammered from above as the Allies advanced with air superiority intact. Why? Because Germany had built a technological marvel while standing on a crumbling foundation. The Reich poured vital resources into the Mi-262 scarce alloys, strained manufacturing lines, its most experienced test pilots and mechanics. And what did it get? A machine it couldn't fully support. Fuel, spare parts, maintenance crews, trained pilots, all in short supply. In hindsight, many historians argue that had those resources been directed toward mass-producing conventional fighters aircraft, easier to maintain, train for, and deploy, the Luftwaffe might have prolonged resistance more effectively, but perhaps that misses the point. Because the Mi-262 wasn't just a machine, it was a mindset, a belief in a technological silver bullet. And that belief was shattered by Mustang pilots who refused to play by the jet's rules. Those P-51 pilots hunted Mi-262s not because they had better aircraft, but because they had better tactics, better training, and a command structure that empowered them to adapt. They understood that even the most advanced enemy has to land, has to slow down, has to follow physics. And that's where they struck. From October 1944 to May 1945, a mere 7 months, the myth of jet invincibility unraveled. What began with cautious curiosity, what is that? Ended in relentless efficiency. Every Mi-262 destroyed during takeoff or landing was one less jet available to strike bombers. Every pilot lost was a blow the Luftwaffe couldn't absorb. Every Allied sweep over a jet base forced German operations further into chaos. Desperation set in. Mi-262 units were relocated constantly. Pilots flew fewer missions as fuel vanished. Engine problems grounded aircraft indefinitely. Morale cracked, and yet some still flew. In twos and threes, scattered units launched missions in April and early May 1945, clinging to duty even as the war dissolved around them. These final days weren't marked by a climactic battle. They were marked by disintegration. Germany's military infrastructure collapsed piece by piece. Jets were pushed into forests, stripped of parts, or torched by their own crews to prevent capture. Some were flown into Allied hands in surrender. Others simply never flew again. Abandoned when fuel and hope ran dry, the Mi-262, designed to sweep Allied bombers from the skies, died a quiet death, not in fire and fury, but in silence, rusting on overrun runways, scattered across the woods, a promise unfulfilled. And the Mustang pilots? They went home, mission accomplished. They had faced a threat unlike any other and found a way to overcome it, not with superior machines, but with skill, courage, and clarity of purpose. That is the true legacy of the Me-260, not just as the first operational jet fighter, not just as a marvel of design, but as a reminder that technology alone does not win wars. It was a case study in imbalance, a dazzling aircraft, flown by elite pilots, crippled by poor logistics, dwindling fuel, and the relentless pressure of better prepared enemies. It taught the world something profound. That innovation must be supported by infrastructure, that bravery must be backed by planning, that even the best weapons fail without the foundation to use them well. In every Air Force today, in every military academy and strategy school, that lesson lives on. American and Allied pilots Drew, Yeager, and the dozens whose names are less well known earned their place in history by proving that human factors matter, that training, doctrine, adaptability, and grit can outfly even the future. The Me-262 showed what was possible. The Mustang pilots showed what was necessary. And in that collision between promise and reality, between speed and strategy, a new era of air combat was born. One that didn't just favor the fastest, but the wisest, the boldest, the best prepared. The Me-262 was a glimpse of tomorrow, but the war belonged to those who mastered today.